Tara Brown and the Swinging London Colour Revolution by Vic Jenham. Chapter 5. As it so happened, my father had recently bought a flat in London to inhabit with his fiancée Sally, and while I disliked her almost as much as I did Miguel, it meant I was guaranteed a place to get going from. Within weeks, I moved into their flat in Belgravia. It was a great location, close to Hyde Park and Buckingham Palace, and not too far from Soho, where the mods were congregating. My mate Glenn, who I'd met in Paris, introduced me into their circles. They were all about smart clothes, coffee, and amphetamines, and smoking endlessly, of course. Alcohol wasn't high on their list, and while I had never been short of drink from an early age on, I didn't mind at all saving it for the wee hours at home or in a club. Being a mod was about awareness, knowing what you and the world around you were about, and alcoholic stupor didn't fit in. Amphetamines did, on the other hand, with that little engine that a pill provided buzzing away inside of you. Being sharp and cool became the natural state of affairs. Mod was an act, but one that was to be taken dead seriously. The last thing you wanted was to be caught off guard in a moment of distinct uncoolness. Since most of those guys had to work for their money, weekdays were a drag which they refused to discuss unless being with their closest friends. On Saturday they came alive, dressed to perfection, the engine running, with cigarettes and coffee at hand. They were on top of their world and enjoyed every single minute of it. The older ones had started out as steady boys, dancing to rock and roll, but when Elvis sold out, they turned to jazz and dance. It was all American music they were looking for, as there was nothing happening yet in Britain. Now they were having money. They had finished school and found office jobs. The weekend was their paradise. Many still worked on Saturday mornings, so the fun started at noon. Saturday night was an all-night affair, and Sunday's pleasures depended on how fit you had to be on Monday and how successful your pals were at luring you away from your duties. I was the worst offender, of course. I never did anything else but having fun, morning, afternoon, and evening. I respected the older guys, though. They had been the trendsetters that put some color and excitement on the wounded animal that London still was. The mods on their tuned-up Vespas and Lambrettas, their shiny leather boots and Italian-style minimal suits, gave the hurting city an early flash of what could be and would come to pass, that office youth could look good and have some fun, and that soon enough the whole of society would jump on the bandwagon. We used to hear a lot of our music in coffee bars, especially those first 2-3 years of the new era, that is, the Tara era. They were an Italian invention which had become popular in the 1930s because it delivered good coffee to a country which had no coffee culture of itself at all. England had always been about tea, that bitter drink that gave courage to the common people and didn't cost a bit. About 100 years earlier, tea had been introduced in working-class circles as the alternative to getting drunk every night. With factory injuries getting out of hand, it seemed a prudent idea. To enforce their alcohol-free policy, the ruling parties came up with association football, quickly turning into the perfect excuse for every Englishman to get drunk on a Saturday afternoon. In my days, people with gusto went for coffee, in the way it was served in the right places. These coffee bars were really cool looking, reminiscent of American diners, but definitely Italian. They were also equipped with a jukebox and often had a modern choice of music, so it was not that hard to push through personal favorites. I never bothered asking them to buy the record, I just gave them my copy. And some of these bars came to rely on that. They asked me to supply them, and I said sure. I was building my influencer imperium. The success of the coffee shops in part had to do with the fact that they were not allowed to serve alcohol, which in turn meant there were no age restrictions for entrance in place. Under 21s couldn't get into a pub, and while individual breaches were always possible, a wink from the publican telling you to get lost straight away whenever he gave you notice, group entry was virtually impossible. In Ireland, I've had to hide in a toilet for a good half hour because the constables were having a taste of the establishment's finest stout. At some point, I just walked out, and the one that saw me going gave me a frown when I went straight for the front door. Irish police are usually a fairly corruptible lot, as long as it doesn't hurt public interest. I was 15 at the time, and in no way was I going to pass for 21. I had been willing to pay the fine, as it was my risk, but nothing was ever invoked against my person. I was able to act this way because I had money. Money shielded me from observing the law to an extent. In the coffee shops, such worries didn't matter. I'd known them from visits with adults. My half-brothers had owned one which did reasonably well, until, as my brothers put it, the painter Lucian Freud, who was a friend of the family, started bringing unsavory company, and they felt at some point they didn't want to carry responsibility for other people's immature behavior, so they closed shop. Now, at 16, I entered a London coffee bar independently for the first time. The Two Eyes, off Wardour Street, had a lot of good artists playing live. There was a young waiter with big hair who claimed he was going to make it in music. His name was Mark, and he had been in some local fashion shoots. He had a nice voice and was very sure of himself. This kid was younger than me, something I was trying to get used to, meeting younger people who had a pretense bigger than mine. Then there was Coffee Ann, which opened at night so kids could go out till late as well. Another good thing was that girls were not afraid to visit these places. Without the alcohol, they felt much safer. We hung out together and played music on the Wurlitzer or Bellamy and talked about things. The music itself, of course, the clothes we were wearing, our scooters, even jewelry and smoke brands. It was all a bit superficial, but it was tasteful. And anyway, nobody bothered to talk about opinions beyond questions of style. There was, on the other hand, a lot to say about scooters. They were quite easy to understand. I could instruct most interested people in a couple of hours about the whole package, and I did so in a handful of cases. Talking about engines is like talking poetry or nature. You want to make it sound good, and you want it to be good. It's about the mechanisms working to perfection. As of the motor vehicles that we rode, they were light and mostly needed fine-tuning, no big deal. But they could be tuned up with all kinds of accessories and adjustments. When it came to style and reliability, I was of help to a handful. Nevertheless, I knew it was going to be cars if I ever got more serious about mechanics. Mod wasn't much of a philosophical movement, but it had style. People generally looked good. Their motorcycles looked good, and their girlfriends looked good. After a week of work, everybody wanted to have fun. Looking sharp was definitely a lot of fun. It was an exclusive hobby that I was at the center of. I wouldn't discontinue going out at night, of course. There were dance halls with live music most nights, and some bands managed to get a gig for a whole series of shows, offering them the chance to get some serious practice in before a live audience. Then there were clubs with one or two tiny dance floors where a band simply wouldn't fit, so the music came from either a jukebox or from records, the latter being played by a DJ. I had seen this before in Paris in the Quartier Latin, in a nightclub which was run by a certain Régine. She claimed she'd been the first to do this and that she was the inventor of the discotheque. When London became hipper than Paris, she also hopped the channel and set up a place over here. The DJs played a lot of rhythm and blues and some of the better rock and roll. plus whichever British act had a decent record out, which in 1962 still was a rarity. Looking back, I often wondered how we could do with such lousy music, but of course there was nothing to compare it with, so you accepted whatever was on offer. Better music was around the corner, but we were not yet aware of that. If we managed to get in, which was not always a given but got easier with every following time you were accepted, we danced all night in the Flamengo and La Discothèque in Wardour Street, and we had indoor raves in the Marquee in Oxford Street. I loved mud dancing, just you and the music, showing your style and movements to the other visitors who were doing the same, and to yourself in the omnipresent mirrors. With every new rhythm we invented a new move and had fun outsmarting each other. We knew the shake, the block and the mashed potato, and we were learning all about the twist. Dancing also functioned as a way to break the ice between strangers. After having shared one of those mini dance floors for a time, striking up a conversation became a whole lot easier. Not that I have ever had difficulty chatting up anybody I met, but you know what I mean. I easily blended in with the clothing fashion of the day, as I had always been an Irish dandy, one of multiple reincarnations of Oscar Wilde, having had my schooling in the arrondissement of Paris. I got to wearing a blue velvet suit that I had made by John Stephen in Carnaby Street. John was a lovely guy. He was absolutely gay and showed great interest in my young, straight body. You can wear anything you like, he used to tell me, and he would push me to try out the weirdest clothes, but I stuck to my suit, which of course could be combined with all manners of shirts and blouses and pullovers if the weather got chilly, and which I had an extra copy made of in case one of them had to be sent to the dry cleaners. Considering I spent a large part of my time smoking and dancing, this was often the case. Mod being a lads movement, the first designers becoming interested in us were into male fashion. Girls, if they could afford it, would get something from a French designer to cheer up their 50s dresses and skirts, which covered their knees, just. Many girls had gone to wearing tight-fitting pants, which worked well with a fancy top. There were few girls in the core mod movement, though they came flocking towards us when they saw that we had money and that straight guys could have an interest in clothes just as well. I was mostly alone in my father's loft, if I was there at all, and I was feeling fine. And then, all of a sudden, my life lifted off. Her name was Nicki. She was the most daring, beautiful and sexy girl I had ever seen. She was an actress, a dancer, an artist, a singer and a model. She had in fact a lousy job, but she could have been all these things, is what I mean. She was as much a pop star as was Dusty Springfield. I was gobsmacked by her appearance and didn't know what to do. I was technically still a virgin and wasn't sure what was expected of me. But she was so easygoing and sharp of mind that I felt from the first moment totally at ease with her. I took her to the fun fair, which was a ridiculous thing to do, but she liked it in the end and she stuck with me. I was suddenly no longer Tara the kid, the fast-moving diminutive heir to the Guinness fortune. I was Tara, half of a pair. I had found a girl I wanted to be in love with, and she wanted me. Nicki was equally smitten, and it made her shine like a goddess. I immediately invited her in with me, and she taught me how to fuck her. I had it off like a rocket, and I quickly became her best lay. We were together all the time, and when we weren't in bed, we hit the scenes full of wonder and warmth from so much sex. I was totally hooked on Nicki. On and off the dance floor, we were a golden couple. Everybody wanted to touch us and say something. Nicki knew all the right moves and danced with extraordinary grace and style. She also had a keen eye for fashion, which I fed by taking her to Paris on a shopping trip. London may be on the move, but the real cool women's clothes still came from the other side of the channel. And then there was the Alfa Romeo, Mummy Darling's birthday present. At 17, I was fully allowed to partake in British traffic, provided I put a large L on the back of my car, which of course I wouldn't. It was an Alfa Romeo Giulietta Sprint, and pretty fast if the engine was turned up the right way. I noticed instantly this was not the case, so I had to dive under the hood and assume the work the factory technicians perhaps were not allowed to do. Now she pulled away as she was made to do, a beautiful red star of a car, the first of many. I hadn't yet informed my mother about my newfound happiness. I had a hunch she wouldn't approve my engaging a penniless nightbird instead of turning my attention to one of the well-bred and decently moneyed girls I used to know in Paris. Better leave her out of it. The twist was all the rage that year. Twisting the Night Away was a cool song, and Let's Twist Again was a mega hit for Chubby Checker, the one artist who wouldn't lie about his body mass index. My sweet mother, in a moment of endearment, had sent for a dancer from New York to teach me the twist while I was staying with her at Lugala, thinking I would appreciate the chance to be on the vanguard once again. In effect, the twist had been around for some years and we already knew the dance, but it was true that he was a fantastic dancer who taught me a few moves to fix up my style, which I was grateful for. But he was also a great bore who was always serious and didn't seem to believe in fun and laughter. At Lugala, our fake Arabian palace in gorgeous surroundings, laughter was a way of life. Without laughter, there was no life. Life was easy on us, so we lived it with a smile. I had taken that mindset with me on my overseas adventures, as you may have become aware. Yet back at Lugala, the sentiment still felt more urgent, as it was of course shared by Mummy Dear and me, and whoever jumped in on the game. In its deepest essence, a requirement for invitation. Every guest had to give it their best and be funny, and anyone who insisted on being angry had better be sharp and brilliant about it. My poor dancing instructor was neither. Next morning, I decided to take him up Mount Fancy. "Do you like it here?" I asked when we had almost reached the top. He had to admit the views were breathtaking, but as an inhabitant of New York City, he prefers using stairs and elevators for vertical movement. Besides, he had to preserve his ankles. He couldn't risk having anything happen to his ankles as a dancer. That answer snapped something inside of me. I thought, I trek you up here early in the morning to enjoy nature, and all a healthy athlete like you can think of are his precious ankles? What a sissy. I couldn't help myself, I just had to leave him behind. I said, "Be careful then," and started running in quick steps down the slope, refraining from taking giant steps that might destroy my knees, a technique which worked best if you knew where you were going to convert to a slower and safer pace. I wouldn't say a word to Mr. Dancer after that, and waited for him to pack his bags and move out. That was the problem with these friendships my mother bought for me, as if they were goldfish in a bowl. I was supposed to keep these relationships alive. That was Mummy Darling handing out experiences. Spend some money on bringing people together and see what happens. We would have lectures and speeches and music and wild conversations, whatever daytime had prepared us for. In my case, I also had to get these teachers out of my life. Poor Twister, I'd left him high on the hill. I guess he'd asked for it. That was at least how I would remember the story.